Hi, so a little tidbit that I've come across, and I wanted to share that. I came across it as I go through my research work to write my articles on psychiatry and eugenics on my Substack. And as you know, I have many reference books that I use, but something really struck me surprisingly, and it has to do, I came across it whilst I was looking for some dates in here. Rule by Secrecy by Jim Mars. Now, anybody who's interested in, societies like Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission and everything, it's a very interesting book, although it's not quite my field, except for the fact that the psychiatric industry and psychiatry itself is used as a mechanism by many of these organizations. So totally by, chance, as I was looking through a date, I came across the fact that in 1921, the Council on Foreign Relations was incorporated in the US, specifically here. Well, in the book it says 29th, in another area it says 21st. But anyway, July 1921, was the Council on Foreign Relations officially incorporated in the US. And then suddenly it made me think, I was like, hang on a second, because 1921 is also the year where the American Psychiatric Association became the American Psychiatric Association. And I've discussed this before, and I just put it on the board there just for convenience. In 1844, it was called the Association of Medical Superintendents of American Institutions for the Insane. That's a big mouthful. But that was the first association of what then became the American Psychiatric Association. In 1892, they changed the name to the American Medico-Psychological Association, and in 1921 it changed to American Psychiatric Association. Now bear in mind that 1844 superintendents were people who managed asylums. They were not doctors, and many of them were not physicians either. Well, doctors, physicians, that's what they were called at the time. So very interestingly, I thought to myself, well, hang on a sec, that's interesting. 1921, July 1921, the CFR was incorporated, and I thought, I wonder when in 1921 the American Psychiatric Association was incorporated. And interestingly enough, I cannot find the exact month. But what I did find was the fact that up until June 1921, the Association of Medical Superintendents of American Institutions for the Insane, they used to publish that journal, the American Journal of Insanity. Can you believe that? This is actually a copy, well, a print of the cover of the first copy in 1844. So they have a journal, and the journal is an American Journal of Insanity. I tell you what, it's all online. The archives are all online, and it just makes for fascinating reading. You need a strong stomach in many instances. But anyway, this is what was going on. So I couldn't find, what I did find was the fact that in July 1921, this publication became the American Journal of Psychiatry. So I think, or I would go to assume, that somewhere around July 1921, the American Psychiatric Association became that because their journal changed. And it's very interesting that at the same time, those two organizations were incorporated. And as I said, I've discussed this many times, and I will continue to discuss as I unpack the rise of psychiatry and modern psychology and their destruction of modern education, the dumbing down of society, and obviously the continuous effort to reduce the population and to declare everybody mad. But what's very interesting also is the fact that there are many creators, or many content creators throughout social media, many website authors, many people who are very interested in things like the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, and so on and so forth. However, I've never come across anything where they talk about their association with the psychiatric industry. And this is what I found astonishing, because the psychiatric industry is the medium, one of the mediums, one of the mechanisms to carry out a lot of the work. Because look at it, you just can declare anybody insane. You can do all sorts of programs to, think people are mad. You can make people mad. You can experiment on people. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff going on, very intimately connected. And yet all those creators and all those channels, nobody talks about psychiatry. And I can't understand why that is, because it's so obvious. It's the elephant in the room. And just to give you a bit more information, if you're interested in that, or if you are a creator or somebody who's investigating those groups, you should really start thinking about psychiatry, because it's right there, like in our face, destroying a world, you know. Anyway, in 1921, something else happened as well. Same year, James Cattell, who's I've discussed already, and this is actually very well discussed in this book here, Enough is Enough, about the destruction of American education. This is a 2024 book by author Bobby Rivera. So if you're American, you want to get that. James Cattell, who was an associate of Wilhelm Wundt in Germany. So Wilhelm Wundt was the man who declared that there was no soul, and founded the first clinical psychology lab, if you could call it that, like that, where experiments were done on people, because people were now considered animals with no souls. Anyway, James Cattell is also a person who went ahead and went back to America. He was American, and began the systematic destruction of American education with other people, with modern psychology and all sorts of weird and wonderful methods to destroy and dumb down students. But James Cattell in 1921 founded the Psychological Corporation with Edward Thorndike, another educational psychologist, and Robert Woodworth. And what's interesting is that corporation was one of the largest creators and administrators of mental tests, so psychometric testing and other such things. And when you actually investigate, because I did that not so long ago, I said, well, what's the name of that corporation now? Like, what is it called? And it went through many hands over the years, but eventually it is now part of the Pearson Assessment and Information, the Pearson industry. And Pearson, by the way, I've got it here. For those who are American and not British, Pearson is the company who produces most of the textbooks for schools in the UK. And here's an example. This is a Pearson BTEC National Engineering Pack. BTEC is a British Technology and Education Council. It's one of the courses which is done from 16 to 18 years old. Now, I had the fortunate or unfortunate experience of being a lecturer for this course for about 4 months in 2017. And this is when, you know, I had another set of experience which demonstrated to me what's going on in colleges and a catastrophe that was going on. So I didn't last, because it was just shocking. But when you go through these books, it isn't the standard of what we had 100 years ago in engineering books. It's done to pass exams. It's a mess. And I believe McGraw-Hill, which is an equivalent in the US, was also taken over in the 1930s. Was it by Ghislaine Maxwell's father or something like that? I think the Americans know more about that. So it's fascinating that now Pearson, in the present, Pearson owns what this association was. And not only that, and you can look that up online, Pearson also controls what's called Pearson Clinical Assessment UK. And there's a website for it. And they publish psychometric assessments and interventions for psychologists, allied health therapists, and education professionals. So over 100 years, and it's all intertwined. There's so much intertwined. And whilst I'm keeping very, very much to the line of education and, you know, the labeling of children with disorders, you know, totally false, the destruction of education, the dumbing down, and what we can do about it, you know, I try to keep to that line. It's very easy to go into all these other tangents and to go down the rabbit holes. But people who do investigate things like the CFR and so on, you know, really look at that, because it is so closely associated. And even more so is the further down, 20 odd years later, in 1948, you get the World Health Organization, the WHO, which was officially founded by Dr. Brock Chrisham of Canada, who was a psychiatrist of very high ranking and who did extraordinary amount of experiments on soldiers during World War II. And he became the first Director General of the WHO in 1948. And now also in 1948, the same man, Brock Chrisham, and British John Rawlings Rees, who was also a psychiatrist and the person who managed the Tavistock Clinic in London, a a very, very sinister organization, the Tavistock Institute, also psychiatrists, also involved in big experimentation programs on soldiers during World War II. Both of those individuals established the World Federation for Mental Health. You know, and in 1952, so just 4 years later, we then get the first publication of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. At the time, only 100 pages, using the International Classification of Disease, which the WHO was using. So it's all intertwined. And then now we have, fast forward 60 years later, we have the DSM-5, and now over, well, just short of 1,000 pages, with over 300 minimum disorders, including all the learning disorders which were introduced in 1980. So there's so much on that line that if your interest is along all those other societies, you really need to start looking at the connection with psychiatry, because psychiatry is the tool used for control. It's covered in 1984, it's covered in Brave New World, it's covered in the book We, it's covered in many, many, many books under different names, but it's the same principle. So we have that. And now, for those other people, which I've mentioned that book, who want to look further, don't forget you have this book here, Psychiatry is the Men Behind Hitler, and that particularly covers the role of psychiatry during the World Wars, German psychiatry, and the experimentation on soldiers, and how German psychiatry then came over to the US during World War One, a little bit before, in between the two wars, and after, to continue their work. So loads to research and loads to study, but please consider, do not forget the involvement of psychiatry, which is intrinsically connected with all these things going on here.